Objectification. It's a word that comes out of feminist mouths a lot, but what does it mean?
Objectification is defined as the viewing of people solely as depersonalized objects of desire instead of individuals with complex personalities and desires or plans of their own. In less fancy speak, it's where someone is treated as basically a thing to have sex with.
Thanks, Lacey. I respect you more now for taking the red pill, but I will still critique your views just as much as anyone else. Lacey's also not the only one parroting these views.
What is sexual objectification? It's the process of representing or treating a person like a sex object, one that serves another sexual pleasure.
But why do these feminists and social justice advocates push this notion? Well, it all comes down to the idea of attempting to claim victimhood. To explain where I get that idea, watch how Caroline here defines a sexual object.
So I built on the work of others, and I put together a sex object test, and if the answer is yes to any of these 7 questions, then you are looking at a sexually objectifying image. First, does the image show only parts of a sexualized person's body? In other words, does a part stand in for the whole? This woman's derriere, for example, in this advertisement.
Now, bear in mind, she said if you answered yes to any of these questions. Not most, not some, any. Right off, the first question is extremely broad. Any image that doesn't show an entire person can thus be indicative of that person being a sexualized object. For example, this photo of a young couple. We see only their heads and shoulders. By displaying only part of their bodies, we are treating them as sexual objects by her very broad definition.
Does the image present a sexualized person as a stand-in for an object? In this image, a woman becomes a table.
I actually have no complaint about this one. I mean, if a person is there to represent an object, then yes, I would hope that that would mean they're being objectified.
Does the image show a sexualized person as interchangeable? That is, as one of many items that can just be swapped out.
So, any group shot of multiple people? So again, this teen couple? Or does it mean anyone in shared clothing or uniforms, like in her example image, or also like, say, the people of McDonald's? I mean, look at all these sexually objectified people. They're all so interchangeable. You think you can just go up to any register to order? Pervert?
Does the image affirm the idea of violating the bodily integrity of a sexualized person and that person can't consent? In other words, is that person being acted upon as though she is a sexual object?
I honestly hope this woman never learns about bondage porn. Wrapping her head around a person wanting to be tied down and used and actually giving prior consent would just blow her freaking mind.
Does the image suggest that the sexual availability of the person is the defining characteristic of that person? And the text for this ad reads, "You know you're not her first, but do you really care?" And it's being used to sell pre-owned vehicles.
Seriously, sex sells. That doesn't excuse the practice in and of itself. Just because it's an accepted practice doesn't make it right. However, we'd have to show some harm to claim it's wrong.
Does the image show a sexualized person as a commodity, something that can be bought and sold? In this advertisement, you see women in a vending machine and a man is choosing a woman, and this is to sell men's shoes.
This and question 2 are about the only ones so far that show women being treated as objects, in that they are being put into a situation normally occupied by an inanimate object. I got no complaint about this one. And in all honesty, how often do these types of images actually show up?
And lastly, does the image treat a sexualized person's body as a canvas? And I'm not talking about inking or tattooing that a person decides, but rather marketers using the body as a specific type of canvas.
If it's just writing on the flesh, this is a very rare form of advertising and almost irrelevant overall. Are we limiting this to just writing on their flesh in some way? Or does this include ads on clothes, thus using their body as a canvas as well? I mean, hell, Adidas here is sure objectifying this man by making him a canvas to sell athletic wear. And don't get me started on how Home Depot objectifies their employees with these aprons. In a nutshell, you can make a claim with most of these vague questions that any image is sexually objectifying. I mean, question 1 is so broad almost any image that isn't entirely full body would be considered. However, these 3 images wouldn't be under these definitions. 1, they are not showing a specific part, they show the entire woman. 2, they're not a stand-in for any object. 3, it's only one woman and not shown as interchangeable. 4, they are not being acted upon by anyone else, let alone without consent. 5. Their sexual availability is not mentioned at all nor implied. 6. They are not portrayed as being able to be bought or sold. And 7. Their bodies aren't being used as a canvas. By every metric and definition given in this TEDx talk, these women are not being sexually objectified. Yet modern third-wave feminists would scream objectification when looking at these pictures. For example, the video I showed earlier with Lacey Green goes with an even broader view of sexual objectification than the one in this TEDx talk, and the TEDx one is already extremely broad.
Objectification is defined as the viewing of people solely as depersonalized objects of desire instead of individuals with complex personalities and desires or plans of their own. In less fancy speak, it's where someone is treated as basically a thing to have sex with. Women are very often portrayed as pretty things to look at, something to try to have sex with. Turn on almost any sitcom on TV and you're gonna see this normalized. We're so heavily exposed to this imagery that scientists have found that both men and women see women's bodies as a mishmash of sexual body parts, while we see men as whole people. Often, objectification is confused with thinking that a woman's hot, but objectification is not the same as being sexual or being sexually attracted to someone. That's a natural part of life, right? But what's not natural and is very much manufactured is constantly portraying women as sex objects for male pleasure. Objectification is women's magazines being littered with all of the things that men don't like. Objectification is being catcalled and harassed just for walking down the street. It's save the boobies and don't let cancer steal second base as breast cancer campaign slogans. It's shitty commercial after shitty commercial using women's bodies to sell everything from A to Z. Close-ups on her ass, her lips, her breasts to sell beer?
Now, she goes on like this, but basically she's rebelling against the very idea of sex sells, or the idea of modern human courting and dating. For example, here.
Objectification is women's magazines being littered with all of the things that men don't like.
She doesn't like that women's magazines are telling women that what men don't like. She's claimed earlier that sexual desire was different from objectification and understood about basic human nature and biology, but seems to ignore how modern dating works. Men predominantly seek out and approach women. Men have to proactively put themselves up for judgment by a woman to win her approval. The person who first engages takes most, if not all, of the risks, and it's the person whom is being engaged who gets to decide whether to accept or reject this advance. But because men are the ones whom have to win the affections of women, women need to be able to draw in potential partners without engaging them directly. People have written entire guides on how to get men to notice you at parties and bars, and these magazines detail out tips and tricks for not only getting a man to notice you, but how to impress him and keep him around. As for her complaints about women being sexualized over men, there might be a biological reason. For example, in 2015, Gerald Reiger of the University of Essex, along with Rich Seven Williams of Cornell University, Meredith Shivers of Queen's University, and J. Michael Bailey of Northwestern University, published a paper on sexual arousal and masculinity-femininity of women, where they found that, based on the responses from volunteers in sexual arousal research, women are, on average, sexually aroused to both male and female sexual stimuli, regardless of their sexual orientation. Contrarily, most men are sexually aroused to either males or females consistent with their sexual orientation. This means that while heterosexual men are predominantly aroused by images of women, heterosexual women are predominantly aroused not only by men, but also a lot of times by women. So sexually suggestive media that portrays sexy women are likely to appeal to both genders, while media that portrays sexy men are only likely to be found appealing by women and gay men. This might explain why women are so predominantly portrayed in a sexy manner in media over men. Other surveys and studies seem to back this data, like the Dazed sex survey that looked at porn viewing habits, which found that women watch more lesbian porn than even men do. So Lacey's objections about women being more often sexualized than men are kind of pointless when you consider that both men and women are attracted to the female form. But I started on this tangent in order to make a point, which was that these broad definitions seek to make victims out of women. In Caroline's definitions in the TEDx talk, almost anything showing a woman can be viewed as sexual objectification. Lacey's definitions are even more vague. It allows the feminist making the claim of sexual objectification to be able to claim such for just about any image they dislike as being too sexual, without any specific metric to measure just what is too sexual. But why is sexual objectification bad? Well, let me allow Anita Sarkeesian to explain.
Since objects can be bought and sold, it follows that once women have been turned into objects, their bodies and sexuality can also be bought and sold. Of course, we can't really talk about sexual objectification without also addressing the issue of violence against women, since the two are intimately connected. Once a person is reduced to the status of objecthood, violence against that object becomes intrinsically permitted.
Anita here seems to think that once someone is treated as an object, you can do whatever you want with them. She later goes on to claim that viewing media that objectifies women leads to women being treated poorly by men, or women suffering psychological problems such as eating disorders or devaluing their own looks and self-worth. I will eventually do an entire video on this subject-object dichotomy, so I won't go into just what Anita has wrong with her first claim, where if somebody's treated as an object, you can do whatever you want with them, but I will touch on where she's wrong in the later claims.
So why does any of this matter? What's the real harm in sexually objectifying women? Well, the negative impacts of sexual objectification have been studied extensively over the years, and the effects on people of all genders are quite clear and very serious. Research has consistently found that exposure to these types of images negatively impacts perceptions and beliefs about real-world women, and reinforces harmful myths about sexual violence. We know that women tend to internalize these types of images and self-objectify. When women begin to think of themselves as objects and treat themselves accordingly, it results in all kinds of social issues. Everything from eating disorders to clinical depression, from body shame to habitual body monitoring. We also see distinct decreases in self-worth, life satisfaction, and cognitive functioning.
By labeling just about any image of a woman as sexual objectification, they can claim women are being victimized without showing any real victimization. They create an imagined problem they then need to solve. Worse, feminists and social justice advocates extend this idea to even non-media examples, like simply looking at a woman in public the wrong way. The male gaze is an integral part of sexual objectification theory. Third-Wave feminists have gone so far as to label any time a woman is looked at in a way they disapprove of as problematic or damaging towards women. The word violence even gets tossed about so much by this crowd that the word is slowly losing all meaning. Many of you have probably seen this video, where a woman silently walks around New York City for 10 hours getting catcalled. This was a collaboration with a group called Holla, who on their website state that after collecting data on street harassment, not only showing the prevalence of this problem, but also creating a case that these acts fall within the spectrum of gender-based violence and are a gateway crime that it can escalate into other forms of sexual assault and violence. Yep, they're calling saying unsolicited things to you violence. Now, to be very fair, some of what Anita says about the downsides of how we portray women in media actually has merit. We do live in an age of mass media, where we see a lot of ads and media images. We have nigh instant access to entertainment and social media, and even more access to celebrities than we ever used to in previous generations. As such, media companies try to put their best face forward, pushing for the most ideal bodies for ads, and even then Photoshop models further. People see famous women looking like this and view them as competition and attempt to compete with these women for looks to better attract men. And because we Photoshop so much of our media, these ideal looks aren't even truly possible. However, that is the only part of our claims I find valid. Even if we stopped Photoshopping models and just used makeup and camera tricks to take the most flattering photographs, women would still view the female celebrities they see as competition, and would still feel the urge to compete by being slimmer, having more flawless skin, and otherwise emulating them to attain the same or better level of beauty, in the hopes that such would attract men. The body monitoring, the depression, and the lack of self-worth, it all stems from competition between women, and we can't stop this competition. Even if we made every single actress and model plus-sized and stopped selling products with sex, people still post pictures of themselves online. Tumblr and Facebook are rife with men and women posting pictures of themselves. I mean, Jessica Nigiri made an entire career out of making cosplay outfits and modeling them, and is now a celebrity for it. The depression, body monitoring, and self-esteem issues are all based on competing with these beautiful women they see. They attempt to emulate and become better than these women they see, and if they can't, it hurts their self-worth. We combat this by teaching our children better. We break down the taboos about sex. We teach our kids about sex and sexuality, and we teach both men and women to initiate relationships and how to do it. If both men and women initiated instead of mostly men, there would be less emphasis on just women's looks. Women wouldn't have to rely on having to be the prettiest and make the men come to them. This wouldn't eliminate the issues Anita brings up, just lessen them, because to be honest, these are issues that will never really go away. People compete for everything. Unless you eliminated the need for competition, it will always be so. And in any competition, there will be winners and losers, and the losers will feel shitty about it. Anyways, that's it for me this episode. Please remember to follow me on Facebook and Twitter to get updates on when I post videos. Please like, comment, subscribe, and once again, I will see you next time.